The blood mixture glows brighter, and Connor's face drains of all color. The magical practitioner's voice cuts through the silent hall. The paternity match is confirmed. Absolute and undeniable. Hundreds of witnesses watch as the alpha who condemned a starving child to death realizes his lies have been exposed. The Alpha King's eyes promise consequences. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The child's crying had stopped 3 hours ago, and somehow that was worse than the sound itself. Celeste Whitmore pressed her hand against her daughter's forehead, feeling the fever burning through skin that had gone pale and clammy. 5 days. It had been 5 days since little Rosalie had eaten anything substantial, and Celeste's own body had nothing left to give. Her milk had dried up 2 days ago, another failure in a long list of failures that had brought them to this abandoned cottage on the edge of nowhere. The silence was unbearable. For days, Rosalie had cried weakly, her small voice growing hoarser with each passing hour, until finally it had faded to nothing but occasional whimpers. Celeste had tried everything to soothe her daughter, rocking her endlessly, singing lullabies her own mother had sung before the fever took her, pressing kisses to that burning forehead and whispering promises she knew she couldn't keep. But now even the whimpering had stopped, and Rosalie lay limp in her arms, breathing so shallowly that Celeste had to keep checking to make sure her daughter was still alive. Each breath felt like a countdown to the inevitable. Each moment of silence stretched into an eternity of dread. Celeste had read once that mothers were supposed to be able to protect their children, that the maternal instinct was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. But sitting here in this freezing cottage with empty cupboards and a dying child, she felt nothing but crushing inadequacy. What good was maternal instinct when she had no food to give, no medicine to ease the fever, no way to save the tiny life that depended on her? The cottage itself seemed to mock her failure. It had once been someone's home, back before the territory disputes had driven settlers away from this neutral zone. Now it was just a shell, walls barely holding together against the wind, windows cracked and covered with whatever materials Celeste could find. Floorboards rotted through in places where rain had gotten in. She'd found it during her 6th month of pregnancy, desperate for any shelter as winter approached. It had seemed like providence then, a gift from the moon goddess. Now it felt like a coffin, a place where she and Rosalie would die together because Celeste hadn't been strong enough to save them. Her own hunger was a constant ache, but she'd grown used to ignoring it. The sharp pains in her stomach had dulled to a persistent throb that she could push to the back of her mind. Her body had started consuming itself weeks ago, burning through what little fat reserves remained, leaving her gaunt and weak. She could see her ribs clearly now through skin that seemed paper thin. Her hair had started falling out in clumps, another sign that her body was shutting down. But none of that mattered. Only Rosalie mattered. Only keeping her daughter alive for one more hour, one more day. Long enough for something, anything to change. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it the promise of snow that would make survival even more impossible than it already was. The fireplace held only ash now. Celeste had burned the last of the furniture yesterday, and today there was nothing left except the ragged blanket they huddled under, and the hope that was growing thinner with each passing hour. Rosalie stirred in her arms, whimpering softly, and Celeste felt something crack inside her chest. Her daughter was only 18 months old. She deserved better than this, deserved better than a mother who couldn't even keep her fed. Celeste's mind drifted back to better times. when she'd still believed the world could be kind to wolves like her. She'd grown up in the Silver Moon Pack, not wealthy or influential, but accepted, part of the community even if her family occupied the lower ranks. Her parents had died when she was 15, killed in a border skirmish that the pack leadership had called necessary, but that Celeste had seen as pointless territorial posturing. She'd been left alone, taken in by distant relatives who tolerated her presence, but made it clear she was a burden. That's when Connor Ashford had entered her life. He'd been 19, the beta's son, handsome and charming with a smile that made her believe she might actually matter to someone. He'd pursued her with intensity that had been flattering and overwhelming, late-night walks where he'd tell her she was beautiful. Stolen moments in the forest where he'd kiss her and promise they'd be together forever. Gifts that seemed extravagant to someone who'd never had much. Small trinkets and flowers that she'd treasured like precious jewels. Looking back now, Celeste could see the manipulation clearly. Connor had never introduced her to his friends or family. Their relationship had always been secret, something he'd insisted was romantic, but that she now understood was shameful. He'd never taken her to pack gatherings or acknowledged her publicly. When other wolves asked if he was seeing anyone, he'd laugh and deny it. And Celeste had told herself he was just being private, protecting their relationship from gossip and interference. She'd been so naive, so desperate for love and acceptance, that she'd ignored every warning sign, every red flag that screamed he was using her. And when she'd gotten pregnant, when she'd gone to him with joy and fear mixed together, expecting him to be happy or at least supportive, the mask had dropped completely. The charming smile had vanished, replaced by cold calculation and disgust. He'd looked at her like she was something vile that had tricked him into a situation he wanted no part of. The words he'd spoken that day still echoed in her mind with perfect clarity. "You think I'd actually mate with someone like you? You're nothing, Celeste. You have no family, no status, no value. I was just having fun, and you were stupid enough to think it meant something. That child isn't mine. You probably got pregnant by some rogue and now you're trying to trap me into taking responsibility. I reject you. And I reject whatever bastard you're carrying." She'd tried to argue, to plead, to make him understand that she'd been faithful, that the child was his. But Connor had been prepared. He'd already gone to the pack leadership with his story, painting her as a manipulative omega who'd tried to seduce him and was now lying about the pregnancy to secure a better position in the pack. And because Connor was the beta's son, because he had power and connections, they'd believed him without question. The rejection had happened 6 months ago, though it felt like a lifetime. Celeste had believed Connor Ashford when he'd said he loved her, when he'd promised they'd build a life together. She'd believed him right up until the moment she'd told him she was pregnant. The change in his expression had been instant and brutal. He'd looked at her like she was something disgusting, something that had tricked him into a situation he never wanted. Within a week, he'd formally rejected her in front of the entire Silver Moon Pack, claiming the child wasn't his and that Celeste had tried to trap him with lies. The pack had believed him. Why wouldn't they? Connor was the son of their beta, destined for leadership and power. Celeste was nobody, an omega from a family with no connections and no influence. When the rejection ceremony ended, she'd been given 24 hours to leave pack territory. No supplies, no support, just an order to disappear and never return. She'd tried to find refuge in other packs, but a rejected omega carrying a child was seen as either cursed or troublesome. Most packs wouldn't even let her pass their borders. The few that did made it clear she'd be little better than a servant, and her daughter would grow up with the same stigma that had followed Celeste her entire life. So she'd run, kept running until she'd found this abandoned cottage deep in neutral territory, far from any pack. She'd survived through the pregnancy by foraging and hunting small game, teaching herself skills she'd never needed before. When Rosalie was born, Celeste had felt hope for the first time in months. Her daughter was perfect, healthy, beautiful. For a few precious months, they'd been okay. But then winter had come early, brutal and unforgiving. The game had disappeared. The plants had withered. And slowly, inevitably, their supplies had dwindled to nothing. The birth itself had been terrifying beyond anything Celeste had imagined. She'd been alone in the cottage, miles from any help, relying on instinct and half-remembered conversations she'd overheard between pack mothers. The pain had been excruciating, wave after wave that made her scream into the empty darkness. She'd bitten down on a leather strap to keep from alerting any predators that might be nearby, her body convulsing with effort as she fought to bring her child into the world. For hours she'd labored, convinced at times that she was going to die, that both she and the baby would perish in this forgotten place with no one to know or care. But then Rosalie had emerged, tiny and perfect and wailing with indignation at being thrust from warmth into cold. Celeste had cut the cord with a knife she'd sterilized in fire, wrapped her daughter in the cleanest cloth she had, and held her close while tears of relief and joy streamed down her face. Those first months with Rosalie had been hard, but manageable. Celeste's body had produced milk, despite her poor nutrition, and she'd been able to supplement her diet with edible plants and occasional small game she managed to trap. Summer had been generous, offering berries and roots and clear streams full of fish. Rosalie had grown steadily, hitting milestones that filled Celeste with pride. Her first smile, her first laugh, the way her eyes would track Celeste's movements around the cottage. Celeste had sung to her daughter constantly, the same songs her own mother had sung, creating a bubble of normalcy in their isolated existence. She talked to Rosalie about everything and nothing, narrating her daily tasks, describing the world beyond their cottage, making up stories about brave Omega mothers and their perfect daughters. In those moments, Celeste had almost been happy, almost convinced herself that they could make this work, that love and determination would be enough. But autumn had arrived early that year, bringing with it the first signs that winter would be harsh. The berries had stopped ripening. The fish had disappeared from the streams. The small animals she'd been trapping became scarce, as if they'd sensed the coming cold and fled to better territories. Celeste had tried to prepare, gathering and preserving everything she could find. But her supplies were pitifully small, nowhere near enough to sustain 2 lives through months of frozen ground and empty forests. She'd tried hunting larger game, setting snares and deadfalls the way she'd seen pack hunters do. But she lacked the strength and skill to bring down anything substantial. A few rabbits, some squirrels, nothing that would last more than a day or 2. She'd tried fishing through holes in the ice once the streams froze, but her hands would go numb so quickly that she could barely hold the crude spear she'd fashioned. She'd tried everything she could think of, every survival technique she'd ever heard mentioned, and all of it had yielded almost nothing. As winter deepened, Celeste had been forced to make impossible choices: feed herself so she could continue producing milk for Rosalie, or save what little food remained for emergencies, keep the fire burning for warmth, or conserve wood for cooking the rare times she found something to cook. Stay in the cottage where they were relatively protected but had no access to food, or venture out into dangerous territory where pack patrols might find them, but where food might exist. She'd chosen to venture out, desperate and half-starved, making the trek toward the nearest town even though it meant crossing through Northern Crown Pack territory. She'd been so careful, moving only at night, avoiding scent markers and patrol routes. But the guards had found her anyway, appearing out of the darkness with weapons drawn and suspicion in their eyes. They'd demanded to know what she was doing in their territory, why a rogue Omega was sneaking through their lands. Celeste had tried to explain about Rosalie, about the starvation, about her desperate need for food, but the guards had been unmoved, accusing her of lying, suggesting she was a spy or a thief. They'd threatened her with arrest, with execution, with punishments that made her blood run cold, and when she'd begged them for just a little food, anything to keep her daughter alive, they'd laughed. One of them had actually laughed at her desperation, had told her that rogues who couldn't survive didn't deserve to, that natural selection was just doing its job. They'd escorted her back to the border and shoved her across it with a warning that if she tried to enter Northern Crown territory again, she'd be killed on sight. Celeste had stumbled back to the cottage empty-handed, hopeless, and that's when Rosalie's crying had started. Constant, heartbreaking wails that spoke of hunger and pain and needs that Celeste couldn't meet. She'd tried everything to soothe her daughter, had offered what little milk her body still produced, had rocked her for hours while whispering apologies and promises she knew were lies. The crying had continued for days, growing weaker as Rosalie's strength faded. Celeste had stopped sleeping, unable to rest while her daughter suffered. She'd walked miles through the snow searching for anything edible, coming back with handfuls of bark and bitter roots that her stomach rejected almost immediately. She'd tried chewing food to soften it for Rosalie, but there was no food to chew. She'd tried melting snow and adding tiny amounts of their remaining salt to give it some nutritional value, but it had made Rosalie vomit. And through it all, Celeste had felt her own body shutting down. Her milk dried up completely, leaving her with nothing to offer her starving child. Her vision had started going dark around the edges from malnutrition. Her hands shook constantly. Her thoughts became sluggish and confused. She'd known she was dying, had felt death approaching like a patient predator circling wounded prey. Yesterday, she'd made one final attempt to find food, leaving Rosalie wrapped in every blanket they owned while she ventured into the forest. She'd walked for hours, finding nothing, her body operating on pure desperation. When she'd finally returned to the cottage, Rosalie's crying had stopped. The silence had been more terrifying than any sound. Celeste had rushed to her daughter's side, certain she'd find a tiny body gone cold and still. But Rosalie had been breathing, barely, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The fever had set in sometime during Celeste's absence, burning through Rosalie's small frame like a wildfire consuming dry timber. And Celeste, with no medicine, no healer, no way to help, had simply held her daughter and waited for the end. That's where they were now, waiting for death in a cottage that had become a tomb, with nothing left to fight with and nowhere left to turn. Celeste pressed her lips to Rosalie's burning forehead and whispered another apology into the silence. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I couldn't be stronger for you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way a mother should. I'm sorry I brought you into a world that's been nothing but cruel." The sound of voices outside shattered her despair, pulling her back to the present moment. Multiple voices getting closer, accompanied by the distinctive sounds of horses and equipment. Celeste's heart lurched with fresh fear. Who would be traveling through this isolated area? Hunters? Patrols? Bandits? None of those options offered anything but more danger. Celeste had tried everything. She'd walked for miles searching for food, leaving Rosalie wrapped in blankets by the dying fire. She'd set traps that caught nothing. She'd dug through frozen ground looking for roots that weren't there. 3 days ago, she'd made the desperate decision to try reaching the nearest town, even though it meant crossing through territory that belonged to the Northern Crown pack. She'd made it halfway before a patrol had found her, threatened her, and sent her running back to the cottage with nothing to show for her effort except exhaustion and despair. Now Rosalie was dying. Celeste could see it in the way her daughter's breathing had become shallow and irregular, in the way her tiny body had gone limp and unresponsive. The fever was consuming her, burning through what little reserves remained. By tomorrow, maybe sooner, she'd be gone. The thought should have broken Celeste, should have sent her into hysterical grief, but she'd gone numb somewhere during the 3rd day of her daughter's crying. Now she just sat there, holding Rosalie close, whispering apologies that the child couldn't hear. "I'm sorry, baby," she murmured, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry your father didn't want us. I'm sorry the world is so cruel to wolves like you and me." Rosalie's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glassy with fever, and then closed again. Her breathing hitched, stopped, and Celeste felt her own breath stop in response. Then Rosalie inhaled shakily, and Celeste's heart started beating again. Each pulse an agony of relief and dread. The sound of horses outside made Celeste's head snap up. Horses meant people, and people this far from civilization meant either hunters or pack patrols. Either way, they were dangerous. She pulled Rosalie closer, her body instinctively curling around her daughter's fragile form. Maybe if she stayed quiet, whoever it was would pass by without noticing the cottage. The voices grew louder, multiple men speaking in tones that carried authority and command. Then came the sound of boots on the porch, heavy and deliberate. Celeste's breath caught in her throat as the door swung open, bringing with it a gust of freezing wind, and 3 figures silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. The first man through the door was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing that marked him as military or guard. His eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency before landing on Celeste and Rosalie, huddled in the corner. His expression shifted from alertness to shock, to something that might have been pity. "Your Majesty," he called over his shoulder, "there's someone here, a woman and a child. They look like they're in bad shape." The second man who entered made Celeste's breath stop for an entirely different reason. He was taller than the first, powerfully built with silver-white hair that seemed to glow even in the dim light, filtering through the cottage's dirty windows. His features were sharp and aristocratic, carved from ice and authority, but it was his eyes that made her heart hammer in her chest. They were the color of steel, cold and assessing, and they radiated a power that made her Omega nature want to submit immediately. This wasn't just any alpha. This was someone at the top of the hierarchy, someone whose presence alone made the air feel heavy and charged. Those eyes found Celeste and Rosalie, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. He moved toward them with the fluid grace of a predator, and Celeste found herself pressing back against the wall even though there was nowhere left to go. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please don't hurt us. We'll leave. We didn't know this was pack territory. We'll go right now." The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Celeste to the child in her arms. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carried an edge of command that made her shiver. How long has the child been without food? Celeste felt tears burning in her eyes. 5 days. She hasn't eaten in 5 days. I tried to find something, anything, but there's nothing left. The hunting is gone, and the town patrol caught me when I tried to get supplies, and I don't know what to do anymore. She's dying and I can't stop it, and I don't know what to do. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes seemed to soften just slightly. He turned to the guard who'd entered first. Marcus, get the emergency supplies from my saddlebag. Food, water, medicine for fever. Move quickly. The guard disappeared immediately, his footsteps loud on the wooden floor. The man turned back to Celeste, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. What's your name? Celeste, she managed. Celeste Whitmore. And your daughter? Rosalie. Her voice broke on the name. Please, whatever you're going to do to us, please help her first. She's innocent. This isn't her fault. I have no intention of hurting either of you, the man said, and there was something in his tone that made Celeste believe him. But I need you to trust me enough to let me help. Can you do that? Celeste looked down at Rosalie's fever-flushed face, at the shallow rise and fall of her tiny chest. She was out of options, out of time, out of everything except desperation. Slowly she nodded. The guard returned with a leather bag that he handed to the man. Celeste watched as he opened it with practiced efficiency, pulling out items that looked like they belonged in a healer's kit. He mixed something in a small cup, added water from a canteen, and held it out to her. This will help with the fever and give her body some nutrients it desperately needs. Get her to drink as much as she can. Celeste took the cup with shaking hands and gently pressed it to Rosalie's lips. At first, nothing happened. Her daughter was too weak to even swallow. But then the man reached out, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he supported Rosalie's head and helped tilt it at the right angle. Come on, little one, he murmured. You need to fight. Just a few sips. Maybe it was his voice, or maybe it was some instinct deep in Rosalie's fevered mind, but the child's throat worked weakly, swallowing a small amount of the liquid. Then another, and another. Celeste felt hope, real, actual hope, surge through her chest for the first time in days. Good, the man said quietly. Keep going. Every bit helps. Over the next 20 minutes, they managed to get Rosalie to drink the entire cup, plus some plain water. The child's color already seemed a bit better, though that might have been Celeste's desperate imagination. The man pulled out food next, simple bread and dried meat that he handed to Celeste. Eat slowly. Your body isn't used to food anymore. If you eat too fast, you'll get sick. Celeste wanted to devour everything in sight, but she forced herself to take small, careful bites. The bread tasted like heaven, like hope, like the possibility that maybe they wouldn't die in this frozen cottage after all. While she ate, the man examined Rosalie with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he checked her pulse, felt her fever, looked at her eyes and skin. The fever's high, but not dangerously so yet, he said finally. The medicine should bring it down within a few hours. The malnutrition is severe, but children are resilient. With proper food and care, she should recover fully. Relief hit Celeste so hard that she started crying, great sobbing gasps that she couldn't control. Thank you, she managed between sobs. Thank you so much. I thought she was going to die. I thought I'd failed her completely. The man's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes shifted. You haven't failed her. You've kept her alive in impossible circumstances. That takes strength most people don't have. He stood, his imposing height making the small cottage feel even smaller. "But you can't stay here. Winter is only going to get worse, and you'll both die if you remain in this place." Fear spiked through Celeste's relief. "Where else can we go? No pack will take us." "I'm rejected, and she's the daughter of that rejection. We're cursed in everyone's eyes." "You'll come with me," the man said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Back to my territory. You'll have food, shelter, medical care, everything you need to recover and start rebuilding your lives." Celeste stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us. Why would you help a rejected Omega and her child?" "Because no child should starve," he replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "And no mother should have to watch her child die, because the world is too cruel to offer help." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. "My name is Thaddeus Nightshade. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and effective immediately. You and your daughter are under my personal protection. Anyone who tries to harm you will answer to me directly." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. The Alpha King. She'd been found by the Alpha King himself, the most powerful wolf in the entire northern region. The man whose territory she'd been afraid to cross through, whose patrols had threatened her, whose name was spoken with reverence and fear. He just told her she was under his protection, that he was taking them to his territory, that they would be safe. It was too much to process, too overwhelming to believe. Celeste looked down at Rosalie, who was already sleeping more peacefully than she had in days, the medicine beginning to work its magic. Then she looked back at Thaddeus, at this powerful alpha who'd shown more kindness in 20 minutes than her entire pack had shown in a lifetime. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said quietly, "but thank you. You're saving our lives." Thaddeus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Prepare to go with me," he said. "We leave within the hour. Make sure the child is wrapped warmly. The journey will take 2 days, but we'll travel carefully and stop frequently to ensure she stays stable." As he left the cottage to speak with his guards, Celeste sat there holding Rosalie and trying to comprehend how drastically her world had just changed. 5 days ago, she'd been certain they were both going to die. Now she was being offered sanctuary by an Alpha King. It felt like a dream, like something too good to be real. But Rosalie was already breathing easier, and there was food in Celeste's stomach for the first time in days. Maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally ending. Maybe there was hope after all. The guards brought in supplies to help prepare for the journey, including warm clothing and better blankets. One of them, the one Thaddeus had called Marcus, approached Celeste with a respectful expression. "We'll make this as comfortable as possible for your daughter," he said kindly. "His Majesty has ordered that we travel slowly and stop whenever needed. Your child's recovery is the priority." Celeste felt fresh tears building. She'd spent so long believing that no one would ever help them, that they were alone in a world that didn't care if they lived or died. Having these powerful wolves treating them with such care and respect was almost more than she could handle. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not turning us away." Marcus smiled gently. "His Majesty doesn't turn away those in need. You'll see that for yourself soon enough. The Northern Crown Pack isn't like other packs. We value compassion as much as strength." Another guard entered with news that the horses were ready and the supplies were packed. Celeste carefully bundled Rosalie in the new blankets, making sure her daughter was warm and secure. The child stirred slightly but didn't wake, still deep in the healing sleep the medicine had brought. As Celeste stood on shaking legs, she looked around the cottage one last time. This place had been their prison and their refuge, the site of her greatest despair, and now her greatest hope. She was leaving it behind, moving toward an unknown future, with people she didn't know. But when Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space with quiet authority, Celeste felt something she hadn't felt in months: safety. This alpha, this king, had shown her more kindness in an hour than anyone had in years. Maybe that was enough to take a chance on. Maybe that was enough to hope for something better. "Ready?" Thaddeus asked, his steel-colored eyes meeting hers. Celeste adjusted her hold on Rosalie and nodded. "Ready." The journey began in the fading afternoon light, with Celeste riding in front of one of the guards while Thaddeus led the group on a magnificent stallion. Every hour they stopped to check on Rosalie, to give her more medicine and water, to make sure she was recovering rather than declining. And every time they stopped, Celeste watched Thaddeus personally examine her daughter with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. By the time night fell and they made camp, Rosalie's fever had broken. She woke briefly, drank some broth one of the guards had prepared, and even managed a tiny smile before falling back asleep. Celeste held her daughter close by the fire and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Thaddeus sat across from her, his attention divided between various reports his guards were giving him and frequent glances to check on Celeste and Rosalie. When the guards eventually moved away to set up the perimeter watch, he spoke quietly. "Tomorrow we'll reach a way station where you can both rest properly. The day after we'll arrive at the palace. I've sent word ahead to have healers and suitable quarters prepared for you." Celeste looked at him, this powerful king who'd upended his travel plans to save a starving child. "Why are you doing all this? Truly? You could have left us in that cottage. You could have sent supplies and moved on. Why take us all the way to your territory? Why give us such personal attention?" Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, his steel eyes reflecting the firelight. "My sister died when I was young," he said finally. "She was only 3 years old, and she died from a fever much like the one affecting your daughter. I was too young to help, too powerless to save her. When I saw Rosalie today, burning with fever and starving, I saw my sister. And I refused to let history repeat itself if I had the power to prevent it." The raw emotion in his voice made Celeste's throat tighten. "I'm sorry about your sister." "No child should suffer that way." "Exactly," Thaddeus agreed. "No child should. That's why I abolished the practice of rejection ceremonies in my territory 5 years ago. That's why I've built shelters for rogues and outcasts. That's why when I find someone in need, I don't turn away just because helping them is inconvenient." He met her eyes across the fire. "You were rejected, Celeste. I can sense it even without you telling me the details, and your daughter bears the weight of that rejection even though she had no part in creating it. The wolf who rejected you is a fool, and the pack that cast you out has failed in their most basic duty to protect their own. You deserved better. Your daughter deserves better. And while I can't change the past, I can ensure your future is different." Celeste felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been broken since Connor's rejection. This alpha, this king, was offering her not just survival, but genuine care. Not just shelter, but respect. Not just food, but a chance to rebuild her life with dignity. "I don't know how to repay you for this kindness," she said softly. "I'm not asking for repayment," Thaddeus replied. "I'm asking that you accept help without shame, that you allow yourself and your daughter to heal, and that when you're strong enough, you consider making the Northern Crown Pack your home. We need wolves like you, Celeste. Wolves who survive impossible odds. Wolves who fight for their children against a world that's stacked against them. That kind of strength is valuable, and I won't waste it. The word settled into Celeste's heart, like seeds finding fertile soil. For so long, she'd believed she was worthless, that her rejection proved she had nothing to offer anyone. But Thaddeus was looking at her like she was someone worth valuing, someone whose strength and survival instincts were assets rather than embarrassments. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. That night, Celeste slept better than she had in months, wrapped in warm blankets with Rosalie breathing peacefully beside her and guards keeping watch to ensure their safety. When she woke to the sound of morning birds and the smell of breakfast cooking, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe the worst was behind them, and something better lay ahead. The way station Thaddeus had mentioned turned out to be a well-maintained lodge built into the side of a mountain, staffed by members of the Northern Crown Pack who treated Celeste with surprising respect. A healer examined Rosalie thoroughly, declaring that while she was still weak from malnutrition, she was out of immediate danger and would make a full recovery with proper care and nutrition. The relief Celeste felt at those words was overwhelming enough that she had to excuse herself to cry in private, releasing months of terror and despair in great heaving sobs that left her exhausted but somehow lighter. When she emerged, Thaddeus was waiting with a tray of food that had clearly been prepared specifically for someone recovering from starvation. Small portions, easy to digest, nutritious without being overwhelming. Eat slowly, he reminded her, his tone gentle. Your body needs time to adjust. As Celeste ate, Thaddeus sat across from her and spoke about the Northern Crown Pack, describing a territory that sounded nothing like the Silver Moon Pack she'd fled. He talked about schools for children regardless of their status, about programs to help rogues integrate, about laws that protected Omegas from exploitation and abuse. It sounded too good to be true, like a fairy tale someone had invented to give desperate wolves false hope. But the way he spoke about it, the passion and conviction in his voice, made it clear he believed every word. This wasn't propaganda or empty promises. This was the vision of a leader who genuinely cared about creating something better than what had come before. What about rejected wolves? Celeste asked, unable to keep the question back. Are they accepted in your territory? Thaddeus's expression hardened slightly, but the anger she saw wasn't directed at her. Rejection ceremonies are illegal in my lands, he said firmly. If a bond forms and one party wants to dissolve it, they must do so through mediation with trained counselors, not through public humiliation and banishment. And any alpha who tries to claim a child isn't theirs, without proof, faces severe consequences. He leaned forward, his steel eyes intense. The practice of casting out pregnant Omegas or mothers with young children is barbaric. It condemns innocence to death or a life of suffering for the actions of others. I won't tolerate it in my territory, and I actively work to change laws in neighboring packs to prevent it from happening elsewhere. Celeste felt tears building again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. You're trying to change the entire system. One pack at a time, Thaddeus agreed. It's slow work. There are generations of tradition and prejudice to overcome. But every Omega I save, every child I protect, every rejected wolf I give sanctuary to, that's progress. That's proof that a better way is possible. The second day of travel was easier than the first. Rosalie was awake for longer periods, drinking broth, and even eating small amounts of soft bread. Her color had returned, and her eyes had regained some of their sparkle. Watching her daughter recover, seeing her smile and reach for things with renewed energy, Celeste felt a gratitude so profound it transcended words. When the Northern Crown Pact territory came into view just before sunset, Celeste's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of a fortress or a collection of rough buildings, she saw a thriving community built in harmony with the forest around it. Houses were constructed among the trees, connected by bridges and pathways that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Gardens flourished even in the early winter, protected by clever greenhouses, and everywhere she looked, she saw wolves of all ranks mixing freely, children playing together regardless of their parents' status. "Welcome home," Thaddeus said quietly, and something in the way he said it made Celeste's chest tighten with emotion. The palace itself was magnificent, but not ostentatious, a structure that commanded respect without demanding submission. Thaddeus led them to a suite of rooms that was larger and more comfortable than anywhere Celeste had ever lived. A fire was already burning in the hearth, fresh clothing had been laid out on the bed, and there was a nursery adjoining the main room that had been stocked with everything a young child could need. "This is too much," Celeste protested, looking around at the luxury surrounding her. "I'm just a rejected Omega. I don't deserve all this." Thaddeus turned to face her, and there was steel in his voice despite its gentleness. "You're a mother who kept her child alive through impossible circumstances. You're a survivor who refused to give up even when the world gave you every reason to. You're a wolf who deserves safety and dignity and the chance to rebuild your life without constantly looking over your shoulder. This isn't too much. This is the bare minimum of what you deserve." Before Celeste could respond, a knock on the door announced the arrival of healers who'd come to give Rosalie a thorough examination. Thaddeus excused himself to give them privacy, but not before instructing the healers to provide Celeste with anything she needed. Over the following hours, Celeste learned just how serious Thaddeus had been about ensuring their recovery. The healers were thorough but gentle, examining both her and Rosalie with professional competence, while treating them with respect rather than pity. They prescribed a careful nutrition plan to rebuild their strength without shocking their systems. They provided medicine for minor ailments Celeste hadn't even realized needed treatment. They answered every question she had with patience and kindness. When they finally left, Celeste was alone with Rosalie for the first time since Thaddeus had found them in that cottage. She sat by the fire, holding her daughter close, and tried to process how drastically their circumstances had changed in just 3 days. From starving and dying to safe and cared for, from outcast and rejected to protected by the most powerful alpha in the territory. It felt surreal, like she might wake up at any moment back in that freezing cottage with Rosalie crying from hunger. But Rosalie was sleeping peacefully in her arms, her fever gone and her breathing steady. The fire was warm, the room was comfortable, and outside the window Celeste could see lights from the Pack settlement twinkling in the darkness, like stars brought down to earth. Over the following weeks, Celeste began to understand what Thaddeus had meant about his territory being different. No one treated her with the disgust or pity she'd experienced in Silver Moon. No one whispered about her rejection or speculated about Rosalie's father. Instead, Pack members greeted her with genuine warmth, offering friendship without expectation of anything in return. Children played with Rosalie in the community gardens, their parents unconcerned about status or bloodlines. Omegas held positions of authority and respect, their opinions valued in pack decisions, and Thaddeus himself checked on them daily, not as a king performing an obligatory duty, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. He brought books for Celeste to read, toys for Rosalie to play with, and stories about the pack's history that helped her understand the vision he was building. Sometimes he'd stay for just a few minutes, other times for hours. And Celeste found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both excited and frightened her. She'd been rejected once. She'd learned the hard way that alphas couldn't be trusted with her heart. But Thaddeus was nothing like Connor. Where Connor had been charming but shallow, Thaddeus was reserved but deeply thoughtful. Where Connor had made promises he never intended to keep, Thaddeus followed through on every commitment he made. Where Connor had rejected her the moment she became inconvenient, Thaddeus had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Celeste was reading by the fire while Rosalie slept when Thaddeus knocked on her door. She welcomed him in, noting the tension in his shoulders and the troubled expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. He took the chair across from hers and was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I received word today from the Silver Moon Pack. They've heard that I'm sheltering you and Rosalie, and they're demanding I return you to face charges of theft and abandonment of pack responsibilities." Fear spiked through Celeste's chest. "They want me back so they can punish me for leaving. Connor probably convinced them I stole something or broke some law." Thaddeus's expression hardened. "I'm aware of what they want and why they want it. I'm also aware that you stole nothing and abandoned no legitimate responsibilities. You were banished, cast out without resources or support. Anything you took with you was yours by right, and you owed that pack nothing after the way they treated you." He leaned forward, his steel eyes intense on hers. "I want you to know that I have no intention of sending you back. I've already sent my response declining their request and making it clear that you're under my protection. But Celeste, I need to know the full story. I need to understand exactly what happened so I can defend you if this escalates." The request was reasonable, even gentle, but it still made Celeste's throat tighten with anxiety. Talking about her rejection, about Connor's betrayal, and the pack's cruelty meant reliving the most painful period of her life. But Thaddeus had saved her and Rosalie. He deserved to know the truth. So she told him everything. She told him about Connor, about their relationship that she'd thought was love, but had really been convenience, about discovering she was pregnant and Connor's immediate rejection, his cruel words about how she'd tried to trap him, his public declaration that the child wasn't his. She told him about the pack's decision to banish her, about the 24 hours she'd been given to disappear, about the months of struggle trying to survive while pregnant. She told him about Rosalie's birth in that cottage with no healer to help, about the winter that had slowly starved them, about the desperation that had brought them to the edge of death. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, and Thaddeus's expression had gone from troubled to coldly furious. "Connor Ashford," he said quietly, and there was violence beneath the calm tone, "is a coward and a liar. And the Silver Moon Pack leadership that enabled his behavior is complicit in attempted murder. What they did to you, what they tried to do to your daughter, it's unconscionable." Celeste wiped at her tears. "But I have no proof that Rosalie is Connor's daughter. I have no way to prove he's lying about her parentage. If it came down to his word against mine, everyone would believe him." "I believe you," Thaddeus said firmly, and my belief carries more weight than an entire pack of cowards and liars. But Celeste, if you're willing, there is a way to prove Rosalie's parentage beyond any doubt. Blood magic, specifically a paternity verification ritual. It's old magic, rarely used because it requires the consent of all parties involved, but it's absolutely accurate. If Connor is truly Rosalie's father, the ritual will prove it. If he's not, it will prove your honesty. The thought of using magic, of having undeniable proof of Connor's betrayal, was both terrifying and exhilarating. What would happen if the ritual proved Connor was lying? Celeste asked. I would use that proof to force the Silver Moon Pack to provide financial support for Rosalie's upbringing, Thaddeus said. Not because you need it. I'll ensure you're both cared for regardless, but because he should face consequences for his actions. And I would make sure every pack in the Northern Territories knew what he did, how he abandoned his child and tried to condemn her to death. His reputation would be destroyed, and rightfully so. Celeste thought about Connor, about the smug satisfaction on his face when he'd rejected her in front of everyone, about how he'd probably convinced himself that she and Rosalie had died somewhere, that his secret was safe. The idea of proving his lies, of making him face what he'd done, was deeply satisfying. I want to do the ritual, she said firmly. I want proof that he's Rosalie's father and that everything he said about me was a lie. Thaddeus nodded with grim satisfaction. Then we'll arrange it. I'll send formal notification to the Silver Moon Pack that we're conducting the ritual and that Connor's presence is required. If he refuses to attend, that refusal will be seen as an admission of guilt. If he attends, and the ritual proves he's lying, he'll face consequences. Either way, the truth will come out. Over the following week, preparations were made for the ritual. Thaddeus hired the most respected magical practitioners in the territory to oversee it, ensuring that no one could question the results. He sent formal invitations to neutral pack leaders to serve as witnesses, building a case that would stand up to any challenge, and he made sure Celeste understood exactly what would happen during the ritual, answering every question she had with patient detail. Connor's response, when it finally came, was predictable. He claimed the entire thing was a waste of time, that Celeste was a liar trying to trap him again, that he wouldn't dignify her accusations with his presence. But underneath the bluster, Celeste could sense his fear. He knew the ritual would expose his lies, and he was desperate to avoid it. Thaddeus's response was coldly efficient. He pointed out that Connor's refusal to participate was suspicious, that an innocent alpha would welcome the chance to prove his claims. He suggested that perhaps Connor knew the ritual would expose him as a liar and a coward. He made it clear that Connor's reputation was already suffering, and refusing the ritual would only make things worse. The psychological warfare worked. 2 weeks later, Connor sent word that he would attend the ritual, though his message was full of complaints and accusations. He'd attend to prove once and for all that Celeste was a liar, he claimed. He'd attend to clear his name and expose her manipulation. Reading his message, Celeste felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Connor had walked right into the trap, and soon everyone would know the truth. The ritual was held on a clear winter morning in the pack's ceremonial hall. Witnesses packed the space, neutral alphas and elders who'd come to observe and verify the results. Celeste stood on one side of the altar with Rosalie in her arms, Thaddeus beside her, as both protector and supporter. Connor stood on the opposite side, flanked by members of the Silver Moon Pack who'd come to support him. The magical practitioners began the ceremony, calling upon ancient powers and speaking words in languages Celeste didn't recognize. They took a small sample of Rosalie's blood, then asked for Connor's. He hesitated, his face pale, but with dozens of witnesses watching, he had no choice but to comply. The practitioners mixed the blood samples with magical catalysts and spoke the final incantations. Then they waited. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then the mixture began to glow, soft at first, but growing steadily brighter. The practitioners examined it carefully, consulting ancient texts and comparing the glow's color to reference standards. Finally, the eldest practitioner turned to face the assembled witnesses. "The blood bond is confirmed," she announced, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "Connor Ashford is the biological father of the child, Rosalie Whitmore. The paternity match is absolute and undeniable." The hall erupted in noise, shocked whispers and angry mutters. Celeste looked across the altar at Connor and saw his face had gone ashen. He'd been caught in his lie in front of neutral witnesses who would carry the story to every pack in the territory. His reputation was destroyed, and there was nothing he could do about it. Thaddeus stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. "Connor Ashford, you publicly rejected your mate and denied your child. You condemned them both to death through your lies and cowardice. You violated the most sacred duties of an alpha, to protect and provide for your bloodline. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Connor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I didn't know she'd actually have the child," he finally stammered. I thought it didn't matter. It mattered to the child who nearly starved to death because her father was too selfish to acknowledge her existence," Thaddeus said coldly. "It mattered to the mother who was cast out and forced to survive alone. It mattered to every wolf in this territory who believes in honor and responsibility." He turned to address the witnesses. "As Alpha King of the Northern Territories, I declare Connor Ashford responsible for the financial support of his daughter, Rosalie Whitmore. He will pay reparations for the suffering he caused, and his actions will be recorded in the official pack histories as a warning against such cowardice. Furthermore, any alpha who attempts similar actions in the future will face the same consequences, and worse." The witnesses murmured their agreement, and Connor looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The Silver Moon Pack members who'd come with him were avoiding his eyes, clearly embarrassed to be associated with such disgrace. As the gathering dispersed, Celeste felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. She had proof, she had validation, she had justice. Thaddeus guided her out of the ceremonial hall, his hand at the small of her back a steady source of comfort. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Vindicated," Celeste admitted, "and grateful. Without you, without your support and resources, I never could have done this. Connor would have gotten away with everything." "You did this yourself," Thaddeus corrected gently. "I just provided the tools. You're the one who had the courage to demand justice, who stood in that hall and faced the alpha who betrayed you. That took strength most wolves don't possess." In the weeks following the ritual, Connor's reputation crumbled. Word spread to every pack in the Northern Territories about his cowardice and lies. The Silver Moon Pack, embarrassed by the scandal, demoted him from his position as future beta. Some wolves even began questioning whether the pack's leadership had made the right decision in banishing Celeste, whether their rush to support Connor had been a failure of judgment. Thaddeus used the momentum to push for broader changes, proposing laws that would protect pregnant omegas and require paternity verification before any rejection could be finalized. Several neighboring packs adopted the proposals, and slowly the culture began to shift. Connor's disgrace had become a catalyst for reform, and Celeste felt a fierce satisfaction knowing that Rosalie's suffering might prevent other children from facing the same fate. As winter deepened and spring approached, Celeste found herself settling into life in the Northern Crown Pack more completely than she'd ever imagined possible. She took classes to improve her education, studied pack law and history, and slowly began to heal from the trauma of rejection and starvation. Rosalie thrived, growing strong and healthy and happy, surrounded by friends and caregivers who treated her with genuine affection. And through it all, Thaddeus remained a constant presence, not demanding, not possessive, but there, supporting, protecting, quietly showing Celeste that not all alphas were like Connor. One evening in early spring, as Celeste was walking through the pack gardens with Rosalie toddling beside her, Thaddeus appeared on the path ahead. He'd clearly been looking for them, and there was something in his expression that made Celeste's heart skip a beat. "May I join you?" he asked, and Celeste nodded, suddenly nervous without understanding why. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, Rosalie occasionally stopping to examine flowers or chase butterflies. Then Thaddeus spoke, his voice careful and measured. "Celeste, I need to tell you something. Something I've been holding back because I didn't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. But I can't keep it to myself any longer." Celeste's heart was hammering now. "What is it? When I found you in that cottage, when I saw you holding Rosalie and trying so desperately to save her life, something inside me recognized you," Thaddeus said quietly, "not just as someone in need of help, but as something more, as someone important, someone precious, someone meant for me." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I felt the mate bond form, Celeste. Not immediately, but over the weeks we've spent together. That pull toward you, that need to ensure your happiness and safety, it's more than just compassion or duty. You're my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess. And I've been falling in love with you since the moment you trusted me enough to let me help Rosalie." The confession hung in the air between them, and Celeste felt like her entire world had shifted on its axis. The mate bond with Thaddeus, the most powerful alpha she'd ever met, the king who'd saved her life and given her justice. It should have felt impossible, but standing there looking into his steel-colored eyes, she realized she'd been feeling it too. That warmth in her chest whenever he was near, that sense of safety and rightness, that growing affection that had blossomed into something deeper. "I was rejected once," she whispered, fear and hope warring in her voice. "Connor destroyed me when he walked away. How do I know this won't end the same way?" "You don't," Thaddeus admitted honestly. "You can't know for certain, because I'm asking you to trust me with something Connor broke. But Celeste, I can promise you this. I will never reject you. I will never abandon you, or Rosalie. I will spend every day of my life proving that you both deserve to be valued and protected and loved. The mate bond doesn't demand that you accept me right now. It just asks that you consider the possibility, that you give us a chance to see where this could lead." Celeste looked down at Rosalie, who'd settled on the grass to examine a flower with intense concentration. Her daughter was happy and healthy and safe. Everything Celeste had fought so desperately to achieve, and the alpha offering her his heart was the same one who'd made all of that possible, who'd shown her that kindness and strength could exist in the same person. "I'm scared," Celeste admitted, looking back up at Thaddeus. "But I think I've been falling in love with you, too. I think I've been feeling the bond and trying to convince myself it wasn't real because I was too afraid to hope for something this good." "Then we'll be scared together," Thaddeus said, echoing words she'd once heard in a story her grandmother told. We'll take this slowly, at whatever pace you need. And when you're ready, truly ready, I'll claim you as my mate and Rosalie as my daughter in every way that matters. But only when you're ready, Celeste. Your choice, your timeline, your heart leading the way. Celeste felt tears building, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. She reached out and took Thaddeus's hand, feeling the mate bond flare bright and warm at the contact. I think I'm ready now, she whispered. Ready to try, ready to trust, ready to believe that maybe the moon goddess brought us together for a reason. Thaddeus's smile was radiant, transforming his usually stern features into something beautiful and full of hope. Then we'll try together, he said softly. And I promise you, Celeste, I will spend every day making sure you never regret giving me this chance. The official mating ceremony was held 3 months later, giving Celeste time to be absolutely certain of her decision. When the day finally came, she stood before the assembled Northern Crown pack in a dress of silver and white, Rosalie standing beside her in a matching outfit, and felt nothing but joy and certainty. Thaddeus's vows were simple but profound, promises to protect and cherish both her and Rosalie, to build a life and a pack based on compassion and justice. Celeste's vows were equally heartfelt, promises to stand beside him, to help him build the better world he envisioned, to love him not because fate demanded it, but because she chose to every single day. The ceremony took place in the pack's sacred grove, an ancient clearing surrounded by towering oaks that had witnessed countless matings over the centuries. Moonlight filtered through the branches, bathing everything in silver light that seemed almost magical. Pack members filled the space. Hundreds of wolves gathered to witness their king claim his mate. But unlike the rejection ceremony Celeste had endured in Silver Moon, this gathering radiated joy and support rather than judgment. Elder wolves spoke blessings over them, calling on the moon goddess to strengthen their bond and grant them long life together. Children scattered flower petals along the path Celeste walked, their faces bright with excitement. Omegas who'd found sanctuary in Thaddeus's pack stood with tears of happiness, seeing one of their own elevated to the highest position in the land. Even the most hardened warriors had expressions of approval, recognizing that their king had chosen well. When Thaddeus marked her, claiming her as his mate before hundreds of witnesses, the bond between them blazed like a star. Celeste felt it settle deep in her soul, a connection that transcended anything she'd experienced with Connor. This wasn't obligation or manipulation. This was choice and love and partnership, forged through adversity. She marked him in return, her teeth leaving a matching claim on his neck, and heard the assembled pack howl their approval into the night sky. But the moment that meant the most came next. Thaddeus knelt down before Rosalie, bringing himself to her level, and spoke words that had been carefully prepared for this occasion. "Rosalie Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying through the grove, "I claim you as my daughter, my heir, my family. Your blood may not be mine, but my heart is yours completely. I vow to protect you, to guide you, to love you as fiercely as any father has loved his child. Will you accept me as your father?" Rosalie, now old enough to understand the significance of the moment, nodded solemnly. Then she threw her small arms around Thaddeus's neck and said in her clear child's voice, "I love you, Papa." The simple words broke something open in Celeste's chest, and she wasn't the only one affected. She could see pack members wiping tears from their eyes, moved by the sight of their powerful king accepting a rejected child as his own. The celebration lasted long into the night, with pack members congratulating them and offering blessings for their future. But Celeste's favorite moment came later, when the festivities had ended and she stood with Thaddeus on the balcony of their private quarters, looking out over the packlands that were now truly her home. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding us, for saving us, for giving us a life I never dared to dream was possible. Thank you for being brave enough to accept my help," Thaddeus replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove that not all alphas are like Connor, that some of us actually value the gifts the moon goddess gives us." As they stood there together, Rosalie sleeping peacefully in the room behind them, Celeste thought about how far they'd come, from that freezing cottage where her daughter had wept from hunger, to this palace where they were safe and loved and valued. From rejected and broken to mated and whole. The girl who'd believed she was worthless had become a queen. The child who'd been denied by her father had gained one who would move mountains to protect her. And the Alpha King who'd spent years building a better world had found a mate who believed in his vision and would help him achieve it. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more werewolf romance tales about Alpha Kings, rejected mates, and second chance love. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment below telling me what you thought of Celeste and Thaddeus's story and what kind of werewolf stories you'd like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.